Can the EU uphold its environmental and social values without choking off business and trade? My guest, Bernd Lange, says it can and should. He's chairman of the International Trade Committee for the EU Parliament. And we spoke just before the Parliament voted for a new law that requires larger companies to scrutinize their supply chains for human rights or environmental violations. I began the interview by asking Lange about his own home government, Germany, and how it withheld its vote for the measure. Now, part of the government in Berlin says that the new law is unfriendly for business.
Yeah, really disappointing, because we have in Germany a due diligence legislation. And I guess with the European legislation, this German legislation will improve. And therefore, for me, it makes no sense to have this abstention in the Council. But it's linked to the situation in the coalition government in Germany. So the smallest party of the coalition has always some elements where they thought they can make a point in the domestic policies. I think it's not right, but it's not my job to judge about that. But listen to the new legislation, it's really an improvement because we are looking not on a checklist basis, so every company has to fulfill the same obligations. We are looking for a risk-based approach because it's really different if you are importing meat from Canada or a T-shirt from Bangladesh. And let's look where a possible risk of violation of international labor standards or international environmental conventions or the Paris Climate Agreement happened and not have an obligation to everybody.
You mentioned the coalition government. It's the sort of business-friendly Free Democrats who are against this in the coalition, as you said.
No, I don't think that they are business-friendly because there is a coalition of business people saying we want it. Even Chibo, the big...
But don't they have a point when they say that it raises more bureaucratic hurdles at a time when most member states and businesses want fewer hurdles and better trade? Is this not one more impediment for that?
No, because look, we have this German law in force. And of course we have in several other member states no law in force. So there is a competition disadvantage in Germany.
Businesses are also complaining about the German law, of course.
And secondly, this German law has to be improved. We have this checklist approach. 43 questions for everybody and then some additional question, not a risk-based approach. And yes, with the European law, some bureaucratic burden will be reduced. So the reporting obligations, for example.
This is, of course, a difficult time for Europe when we look at the economy, especially Germany and its struggling economy right now. Do measures like the supply chain law, do they not put a burden on businesses at a time when they need fewer of those? And it's not just that law, but we spoke earlier today to the Indonesian ambassador to Germany. The EU is negotiating a free trade agreement with Indonesia right now, and he points to the EU's deforestation measures, anti-deforestation, I should say, which attempts to certify forest products from some countries where deforestation has been a problem. Indonesia says it's too much of an impediment for them and that it's blocking that free trade agreement. These kind of social and environmental laws that the EU is pursuing, is that not an impediment right now when trade more than anything is necessary?
No, look, we are all on the whole globe looking for more sustainability, and we need, and this I guess is the result of the Paris Climate Agreement, to reduce CO2 emissions worldwide. And we have the ILO conventions, international standards for labor rights, and we have some environmental conventions from the United Nations. So these are there, and these are our common goods. And now looking how trade can really benefit in the implementation of this international conventions. It's not European values or European legislation or European vision of society. It's a universal perspective for people and the environment.
But does it not ultimately get in the way of that kind of trade? Does Indonesia not have a point?
Then we have to look how we can implement. I had a long discussion with the environment minister of Brazil, Madame de Silva. looking on deforestation, how we can monitor the situation. What's about geolocalization? Can we use European satellite pictures? How we can certify the products? What about traceability? They have some certification systems in Brazil. So how we can work together hand in hand into partnership. And at the end of this conversation, see, yes, it's really helping also my goals for the Brazilian society. And perhaps we miss a little bit the correct communication. And also with India. I'm quite happy that we are negotiating now with India a comprehensive trade agreement. They agreed to negotiate on everything. That's important. This is a difference to 2013 where we stopped the negotiation last time. And now we have to look what's the situation on the ground, how we can implement some of their measures in such a trade agreement. I'm quite optimistic that this leads to a result.
You mentioned Brazil. Brazil, of course, one of the Mercosur countries with which the EU is trying to finalize this trade agreement. That's also been stalled in part because of concerns over climate issues. In this case, the Amazon basin.
No, that's not true.
But that is part of the hesitation for many countries. There's been massive protests, not on the parliament level, perhaps.
No.
But
look, it's really an illusion that trade negotiations really failed because of the sustainability part. We have really discussed with the Mercosur countries on detail an additional protocol, taking on board their interest, and it's ready. And also with Australia. And both agreements failed because of the interest of the farmers. In the case of Australia, it was the lobby in...
Who were joined by advocacy groups pointing at the Amazon basin issues. That strengthens that protest against many of these agreements. Is that not true?
But on the Mercosur countries, it's on our domestic farmers where this failed, because France said, no, not anyway. So CETA perhaps, but Mercosur never. And we have also some similar discussion in some other member states. So we have to really focus on the agriculture sector on both sides. That's for sure. How to improve their living conditions. And, of course, also the ideological obligations to protect our globe. But there is a serious problem. And therefore, before really to be able to conclude further trade agreements, we have to look on detail on the situation of farmers.
That means coming more to their side and offering them more.
Yeah, and also looking to the supply chain. So a farmer producing meat or milk is not really benefiting from the supply chain like a processor making cheese from the milk or a dealer selling the cheese. And this supply chain, I guess, has to be really new constructed. And we made a legislation on unfair trading practices. And this was the first step, and we have to work on that so that at the end of the day, everybody has really a fair share of the produced product. Because at the end of the day, the figures of exporting agriculture goods to a third country is positive, but on cheese, on wine, on champagne or whatever. So the processed products are really positive, but this is not benefiting.
The message isn't coming through somehow.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not benefiting the original producer from the fundamental product.
I want to move on to the U.S. Is Europe ready for new trade tensions in the coming year?
So nobody is hoping that Trump will become president again. But of course we are filled up our toolbox of defensive measures, like the anti-coercion instrument, which was developed because of Trump's clear message. If we would establish a digital tax in Europe, then he would put tariffs on European cars, and you want to use trade and investment as a political weapon, and therefore we have now a new instrument to be ready to defend our economic interests. So we have our toolbox ready, and we are also not afraid to go to WTO Certainly, of course, we are trying to calm down a little bit the situation. We have this Trade and Technology Council to establish some working relations.
But there's largely been disappointment that an agreement wasn't hashed out with steel, for example. Hasn't that been something of a failure?
No, yeah, but you have to recognize that the situation in the United States has changed. They are really focused now on domestic issues, and they are not so much dependent on import export as European Union is. So that's a fact that we have to recognize, not accept, but to recognize. And I'm quite sure that they will not stick to the rules of WTO in all cases. So, therefore, we have to use our own defense instruments. But nevertheless, the United States is still our biggest trading partner.
Is it not to the benefit of the EU to come to a more bilateral agreement with the US for steel, for the creation of a permanent TTC, for example, even if that veers a bit from WTO principles, especially with China and the way it's trading right now?
No. You have two elements in your question. Second element, no. We are sticking to WTO rules because we have really totally diversified trade landscape with a lot of countries worldwide, and we want to avoid any escalation. And if we biggest partner in WTO would really break WTO rules, then an escalation will come, that's for sure. Secondly, yes, we are ready to negotiate with the United States some comprehensive agreement like TTIP or even some low-hanging fruits like the steel issue. But at the moment, they are not ready to give commitments to anything. And that's a major problem. As you know, since 6 years, they have not negotiated any trade agreement with any countries. And even such low elements like this IPEF with the countries in the Indo-Pacific failed in October last year because the Congress, specifically the House, made quite clear no commitment from the side of the United States. And reading some strategy papers from former President Trump and from the Heritage Foundation, they will go ahead in this direction. So there will be no commitment. They will defend their domestic interests in the next years.
Is it likely that trade tensions are going to rise even if President Biden is reelected, given that Europe is sending more of its exports, especially Germany, to the US, which has a strong economy? We talked about China. There are concerns that it has overcapacity. Is this really just a Trump thing, or is it possible that with consumption being so low here on the continent, being so low in China, that the US, regardless of who's leading, is going to look and say, this isn't in our favor if so much trade is coming from these countries?
I'm not sure that this is true, but the actual policy is going in this direction. This is really a change. After World War II, we had really an openness of the US economy. The guard on WTO was founded also by US, and now it's going back to a state-driven economy and really to protective measures. And this Inflation Reduction Act was created by the Democrats and Biden, of course, and having this huge range of local content, which leads to de-investment in Europe and investment in the United States. That's not really fair and also not in line with WTO rules, but this is a policy. Of course, Biden is more, let's say, cooperative, and we can really agree also on some standards and some future-orientated issues like artificial intelligence and risk management of that. But there is a new direction of economic policy in the United States, that's for sure. And we have to live with this. And I guess in some areas we have possibly room for cooperation, in some others not, because we have different interests globally than the United States.
Do you see overcapacity from China as a problem? It's being reported as such in many places. What is the concern? This has long been a claim that China has put too much on the markets. What exactly is the problem?
The problem is if this overcapacity is financed by illegal subsidies or this overcapacity is put on the market below production costs, so subsidies or dumping. And then we have our instruments, and we are using that. Around about 80% of our anti-subsidies, anti-dumping cases are directed against products coming from China. Also Chinese steel, for example, where we have globally a big overcapacity in China. Or look to the solar panels, where we established some years ago also anti-subsidies tariffs. But of course, China is big, and they have an advantage of economic of scale, and we have to deal with this. We want to have production really in a proper climate neutral way, and therefore we establish also the CBAM to make clear that in future also import products have to be priced on their CO2 content, and this will be also limit a little bit the steel import coming from China and to reduce overcapacity. This let's say, phrase of overcapacity is a little bit complicated because we have also in Europe overcapacity in car production.
Which you send to the US, which you send to
the whole world.
Sure.
So, but it has to be fair. That's really the important issue, that the level playing field has to be guaranteed.
Is it not in some ways better to have these cheaper alternatives, if it can be made there for cheaper, to meet the continent's climate goals actually? If some of these climate components, if electric cars can actually be made more affordably and sold here successfully, in some ways that's actually not a bad thing, is it?
No, that is not a bad thing if the price building is fair. And we have just an investigation. Look to the e-bikes. I have no clue if you are driving an e-bike. But 50% of the sales in Europe are e-bikes, and most of them are coming from China. And we had the situation that we found some illegal subsidies, price building which was not fair to the rules. And there was a significant market share in 7 months, around about 25% of the market share. So we established tariffs between 40 and 80%. Depending on the concrete company producing this e-bike. So then we have the level playing field. And then, of course, if you like to buy a Chinese e-bike, why not?
Is that not a difficult line to walk, putting punitive measures on imports that are coming from China when so much of Europe's business is looking at Chinese markets to sell there? How difficult does that make your job?
So therefore we have to be clear, and we need evidence. That's totally clear. This is not a protective measure. And also regarding the electric vehicle, proper investigation, proper figures, and then we can react. And my experience is indeed with China, if we can demonstrate that there's evidence and concrete figures, then China is accepting this.
Last question, are you optimistic or pessimistic when you look at the coming years in trade, free trade, European trade?
It's challenging. We have to deal with fragmentation of globalization, that's for sure, and therefore we need some defensive measures, and we need a whole network of trade agreements in true partnership with reliable partners.
All right, Herr Lange, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.